Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Great Locks. I'm Gunther the Great, and today we're going to talk about Lil Skies. Now, is he balding, or what's really going on? But first, before we get into that, I just wanted to mention that just released Great Merch Season 3. Great Merch is basically everything revolving around being great. But yeah, guys, make sure to check the merch link down below and you can see what you can find. But let's talk about it. Is Lil Skies going bald? Many of you guys have seen that it looks like Lil Skies has bald spots. Now first, let's bring some correction to this. These aren't necessarily bald spots. Now before we label these as bald spots, let's take a look at his history, because that's where you can figure out what's really going on. Lil Skies' hair type is most likely a 2C or maybe a stick with the 2C. I think it's more of a wavy versus a curly, because he did go with a straight hair method in order to get his dreadlocks, which I most likely did twist and rip and crochet hooking. Not sure about the twist and rip, but I know for sure crochet hooking. And you always base the method off of his hair type. It's easy to know what method to do if you know what your hair type is. Say for a straighter hair type, you want to do a twist and rip. If you have a really coarse and a tighter curl pattern, you definitely want to do a twisting with gel. Those are the polar opposites. And the maintenance is always dependent upon the method you chose to get the dreadlocks. So if we know that he did crochet hooking, and you know that crochet hooking is a maintenance method as well, that's most likely what he did with maintenance. And you could have done twisting with gel at the roots, but as far as the lengths of the hair to pull in any loose hair or frizz, you would do crochet hooking. A link to a crochet needle will be down below. Now that we know his history, we know that he had braids for a really long time. We know that he had dreadlocks for quite some time. Before that, we've seen that he had really coarse hair, really thick hair, but now it looks like it's thin. So what really happened? Now this didn't only happen to Lil Skies, this happens to so many people when they go from long hair to short hair. Is it balding? It could be, but could it just be that his hair texture is different? Because at the roots, it's used to being long, and now that it's short, it doesn't look like short hair is supposed to look. This is why you see people with high top fades and the hair grows differently on the sides than on the top. The hair texture seems different. And that's just how it's gonna look in the beginning stages. That's why we see his hair how it looks now. We'll see the fullness of his hair eventually down the line. And this isn't just about Lil Skies' hair. This is for anybody out there who's thinking, man, if I cut my dreadlocks or I cut my braids or cut my long hair, I'm gonna have bald spots or it's gonna look like I'm balding. But don't be alarmed. When you cut your hair, what happens is your hair texture is slightly different than when it grew out originally. And it just takes time for your hair to get that natural texture back. In this case, his hair looks thin, but it's gonna eventually look thicker when the texture comes back, if it comes back. Because on the flip side, it can be balding. We've seen people who've had dreadlocks for a really long time. We've seen Lil Wayne, who is now balding. We've seen so many other people who are actually balding from having long hair. And that's a whole other story. And that could be his story too. But we can only tell after a few months. So all of you wondering if he's balding, maybe, maybe not, but we'll see in a few months. But this does answer the question if he is balding or not. So an overlook of everything, when you cut your hair from being long to short, it's gonna have a weird texture. It may even have more of a straighter texture to it, even if you have really tight curls. Just because at the roots, that's the straightest and the most tension you have. So the hair is getting mostly pulled. Especially if you have a heavy hairstyle like dreadlocks or braids. Your hair is almost getting permed along the process, especially with dreadlocks. When I combed out my hair, the hair texture was different. It took a couple washes for it to come back to normal, and that's just how it goes. And the same thing with cutting your hair. If you have dreadlocks or if you have braids or even just long hair, it's gonna have a different hair texture when you cut it. So it's not always balding, and it's not gonna stay that way. Definitely wash your hair, definitely do everything that you're supposed to do with your hair, and you'll see it come back to its natural texture, and honestly just look better in the way you want it to look. Now, like I said, on the flip side, if his hair had a bunch of tension, if when he had braids he did them really tight, then that can result in traction alopecia, which eventually turns into hair loss. Traction alopecia is basically your hair follicles, or in this case, your pores that your hair grows out of. That's the best way to describe hair follicles. Those getting choked out from inflammation at the scalp. Inflammation happens from hair getting tugged or pulled or scratched at, or any kind of tension. That's where the alopecia comes into play and hair loss can happen. So his dreads or his braids can be evidence of traction alopecia. So that's why it looks like Lil Skies is balding or going bald. Now let's face it, if he were to start going bald, he has money, he can definitely get a hair transplant. And anybody can get a hair transplant. A hair transplant is basically where they take hair from another part of your head, which a fun fact is all the hair on the back of your head will stay there all of your life. So they can take that hair, grab the hair follicle and place those hair follicles on the top of your head where you're balding, and that hair will permanently stay there because it's the hair follicle that will last. But that's a whole other subject. I wanted to mention the product of the day, and the product of the day is an interlocking tool. Now, this is something that Lil Skies could have possibly used. I know this is something for sure that Lil Pump uses and many other celebrities use, and a lot of people with dreadlocks use an interlocking tool. Interlocking is a form of maintenance. All it is threading the tip of the dreadlock through the root of the dread and locking it up. It's basically tying knots with the roots, which eventually pulls in all the frizz and the loose hair at the root. Interlocking can be tricky, so you can find an interlocking tutorial on greatlocks.com, so make sure to go to greatlocks.com. For all of you wondering, greatlocks.com is a website that has all dreadlock necessities as far as crochet needles, twisting gel, dreadlock tutorials, and basically everything you need compiled into one website. So make sure to go check out greatlocks.com, and it's for you guys, and you guys can actually be featured on the website, which is really cool, and I'll get onto that later. But the interlocking tool is great for interlocking. It's easier than using your fingers. It's better than using a handle interlocking tool, because those can be pretty tricky and it can get caught on your hair, and it just makes it a little harder to actually use the tool. But the interlocking tool that I'm linking down below is very easy to use, and it doesn't pull on any hair, and it's an overall great product. It can also be found on greatlocks.com with all the other products that are featured. Now, I'm also doing this thing to where I answer a question of the day, and this question is from Cruz_Cruz on Instagram. They said, "Hey, I found her page. I have 11-year-old locks that I want to cut, and I don't know where to even begin. I'm dealing with a lot of scalp pulling and actual pain. Any help or advice would be amazing. I'm kind of in a bad place with my hair, and I don't know what to do." I'm telling you, anybody with dreadlocks or long hair has experienced this. If you haven't experienced it, you're going to experience it. If you've been through it before, you know what we're talking about. This can be very painful, and this is what I'm talking about earlier with traction alopecia. If there's pulling at the scalp, that could be very unhealthy for your scalp and just very uncomfortable in general. The best way to handle any tugging or pulling would be to comb out the roots of your dreadlocks. Now, while I was interlocking my dreadlocks, I was combing out the roots because obviously I wanted to comb out the root and make sure that the root is all the way out and like extended so that it's a perfect interlock, instead of like interlocking all this like loose hair and kind of just like making sure that all of the hair that needed to be interlocked was being interlocked and that there was no more loose hair. So that's what combing out the roots does. It only benefits you. And you also want to comb out your roots when you're twisting your hair or doing any other form of maintenance, because you want to stretch out your root as much as possible before you do maintenance, because it allows your hair to elongate instead of like getting clumpy and being thick in one part and then skinny in one part, thick in one part. You got to do it consistently. You want all of your hair to be at an even place, because what pulling really is hair inside of a dreadlock being tighter than other hair in the dreadlock. So it's getting tension from the weight of the entire dreadlock on less hair than that's actually in the dreadlock. So the best thing to do is to comb out your roots, and then you can do interlocking like I mentioned earlier, or just leave it like that and let it grow out for a little bit. But the best thing to do and best way to handle any sort of pulling or tension at the scalp is to allow your roots to grow out and comb them out. Now, I'm not saying comb out your dreadlocks entirely, but I'm saying if you comb out your roots, it evens the roots out and alleviates the pain or the stress on your scalp. So it's the best thing to do, in my opinion. I definitely recommend to anybody out there who has tension or pulling at the scalp to comb out your roots, allow your hair to grow out a little bit, and this will alleviate all that pain and stress on your scalp and then result in healthier dreadlocks. And obviously after the hair grows out, you can maintain your roots eventually. Hopefully that answers your question. Make sure to follow Greatlocks on Instagram, ask questions, tag Greatlocks to be featured on the page, channel, and the website. But on that, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.